Conferences are coming up, and let's be honest, they can be kind of stressful. You have this short window of time to sit down and talk to the teacher or teachers and try and get as much information as you can about how your kid is doing. And you'll probably get at least some new information about your kid's grades or test scores or behavior. It's a lot.
Right. And then, not to mention that the conference experience itself can be overwhelming, especially if you have an older kid who goes to a big school. So, just navigating that part, maybe you have back to back meetings, you need to find the rooms. Or, my worst nightmare, maybe everyone's in a really echoey place all together, and you're trying to talk to your kid and go from teacher to teacher in a loud gymnasium.
Oh, that's the worst. Like any important meeting, though, a little conference prep can go a long way. So, today we're going to talk about how to prepare for conferences, questions to ask, and how to advocate for your neurodivergent kid during a quick conference. Welcome to Parenting Neurodivergent Humans. I'm Dr. Morgan Beidelman. I'm a psychologist, former teacher, parent to two kids, one of whom is neurodivergent, and I am neurodivergent myself.
And I'm Brianne Colpitz. I'm a school psychologist, parent to two neurodivergent kids, and I'm ADHD, which means I'm autistic and have ADHD.
So, before conferences, there are a few things that you can do to make the most of the time. Don't worry, these are short, they can be broken up into a few small chunks of time and can really help you get more bang for your buck, so to speak, when you do get the opportunity to sit down with your child's teacher. First, talk to your kid. A quick 10-minute or so conversation with your kiddo can give you a lot of information about what to prioritize during the conference. Tell your kid that conferences are coming up and that you want to know a little bit more about how things are going for them so that you know what to talk about during conferences, what to ask about. We made a little download actually of this. So if you don't want to write notes during this podcast or if you're driving, please don't write notes. Don't need to memorize things. You can check the show notes and get the questions in a handy dandy place. But here are some of my kind of top questions. One, what are your favorite parts of school this year? What are you enjoying so far? Second, to use language that kids always say, everything's so annoying. So I like to say, what are the most annoying parts of the school year this year? What do you want your teachers to know about you, or what do you wish your teachers knew about you? What's one thing that you would change about your school or your class if you could? And is there anything that you would like me to ask or tell your teacher?
I'm like over here getting ready to take notes, just had conferences, and I'm like, oh, there's a download. Awesome. Awesome. I love that. So, if your kid has a learning plan, I also like to check in on those. So, you could ask, about the accommodations. What are they using? What are they receiving? What is most helpful in your classes? Are there times or activities that are not going well where you might need some extra support or some more or something different? And then take some time to plan your conference questions. For this, it can be helpful to think through which one or two topic areas are the most important to you to cover and come up with a few questions that address that. So maybe you're most concerned with social interactions and friendships because that's been a big area of stress for your kid. Am I being called out? I don't know. In that
So
case,
many
you.
kids. So many kids.
Oh gosh. In that case, you might ask, hey, does my kid have a friend? Does my kid have a friend in class? How is my kid doing in like class discussions or group work? So, if you're concerned about or curious about grades, classwork, or behavior, you can choose questions related to those things. If your kid has one teacher, I would try, have 3 or 4 questions at the ready. As I said, we just had conferences and the teachers did start by asking, like, hey, what are your questions? And so having some ideas of like what even just the areas I wanted to like highlight and make sure it didn't get missed was helpful. So if your kid has multiple teachers, maybe, 2 questions per teacher, just whatever feels right, not trying to overwhelm you here. Again, check the show notes. Erica, our producer and editor, made a whole list and it's grouped by topic and super helpful to get started with that.
Thanks, Erica. Yes, I know we're going to get to this, but like the information that you can get from those conferences can be really helpful. And don't be overwhelmed, shocked, or anything if what your teacher says is somewhat different from what a kid says. For example, this made me think of it like often when we talk to our kids, they'll say, like the kids that I serve, they'll say, like, I don't have any friends. Now you prioritize that question in the conference, and the teacher's like, oh my gosh, they're friends with all these people. It doesn't mean that one party is not telling you the truth. It can often mean that there's a difference between what's being perceived and by one party and what's being perceived by another party, right? So all information is just information, and you can always kind of go back, follow up with your kid or with the teacher later, but get the information because that's a great place to start.
Really good point.
It's just something I see all the time. You're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, my kid says he doesn't have any friends or she doesn't have any friends, and but the teacher says they do. What does that mean?
Yeah.
So, anyways, we've talked about preparing for the conference. Now let's talk about, which I've kind of already alluded to here, but diving in a little bit more to the conference itself and things that can come up in particular for neurodivergent kids. We have three scenarios that we've seen again and again. And so I think it would be really helpful for us to kind of go through them. As always, I do want to put a huge asterisk here because we love teachers. I used to be a teacher. I used to be a school psych. Brianne used to be a school psych. We've spent a good portion of our careers in schools, and we love teachers. We
Yeah.
love schools.
I'm married to a teacher, so in case you didn't know that, fun
Mhm.
fact.
Yeah. So if you've been here a while, you know that to be true. And 99.99999% of teachers love kids and they are doing their absolute best. And we have talked about in other episodes how most teachers have little or no, mostly no, training on neurodivergence. So when we talk about some of these things, we just want to say that there's a baseline level of respect for teachers. And this is the assumption that people do better as they learn and know better, and that they probably just don't know.
Yeah, this isn't meant to be a gotcha. And if you don't know, then hopefully we can help you know.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so first scenario that I hear a lot about is that your kid is has a diagnosed disability, and that is the area that they are like told that they need to work on. So this might sound like you have a child with ADHD and you get into the conference and they're like, they're creative. They like make, they put together ideas that other kids don't think of, but they really need to work on their focus. And I've seen them focus on XYZ. So I know that they have the potential for focus. I'd really just like to see them focused more in blah, blah, blah moving forward. Right. If that's a scenario, you can replace ADHD and attention with lots of other, different things. But where the feedback is essentially the same area that is the diagnosis, and you're like, yeah, you know who would also like to have better attention? My kid.
Right? Yeah.
Uh, and so in a situation like that, what I often say to do is, acknowledge that it's a challenge for the child, right? Because yeah, that's true. And remind that it's the crux of their disability.
Yep. Yep.
And then to say that you will continue to work on it, they are working on it, and that you want to make sure that while we're working on the area that is most impacted by the disability, that we are also accommodating the disability so that the child has adequate opportunity to express their capabilities, their intellect, their knowledge, etc. Right? And then shift the conversation to functionality. So, to give a different example, if you have a child who's dyslexic and they struggle with spelling, but has an accommodation that's like speech to text, and spell check with that accommodation produces readable work, meaning that, like, as long as you can read what they're trying to convey and the spelling is not so impacted that you're not understanding what they're trying to say, then that's pretty highly functioning, right? That accommodation is creating a high level of functionality for that kid. And that's what we want, right? We want to work on the area of deficit, and then you want in the meantime and or throughout the lifespan, depending upon what it is, we may also need to and want to accommodate so that we're increasing that individual's functionality in whatever setting. So in a situation like that, the accommodation is working. Great. On the other hand, if the teacher is trying to express that with the accommodation, still their functionality is impacted. So this would be a scenario where you clarify the accommodations are in place. Maybe you're having a conversation. They're like, the teacher's saying things like, I've been doing this, I've been doing this. I've even maybe done some additional things that weren't necessarily on here, and we're still kind of struggling, right? That's where we're saying we have a situation where we have a child with a disability, accommodations are clearly in place, and yet we're still not in a place where we're seeing what that child is truly capable of, i.e., the symptoms of the disability are still shadowing the capabilities. And so, in that case, we need to have a more robust conversation around accommodations, because we can say that, like, functionally, this is pretty low functionally, right? Because they're not being able to show their abilities. So in that case, we need to come back and discuss the accommodations first and foremost. Maybe they need different ones. Maybe there's something about that particular setting or the time of day that's further impacting them. And or maybe we need to shift how something is being taught so that we are kind of circumventing or the disability or supporting the disability a little
Time to
bit.
get curious.
Yeah.
Time to get curious. Yeah.
Brianna always comes in and so eloquently summarizes what I've been yammering on about. So thank you.
It is what I do. Do you ever wonder how your kid will find a job when they can't even find their shoes? The first step to teaching your kids to work the way that they're wired is helping them understand their intensity profile. I got a big dopamine hit learning about my intensities to be able to teach my own kids. Head over to our friends Intensity Hub and take the intensity quiz today at intensityhub.com. Okay, scenario 2. Let's imagine you hear from the teacher. They're telling you that your kid's ability is fluctuating, like they need to try harder, apply themselves better. And
Mm.
here's the deal. We recently did an episode on the dynamic nature of neurodivergence. So if this resonates with you, maybe listen back to that one. But neurodivergent disabilities are dynamic. Also, spoon theory applies here. We did an episode on that. Like, listen to that. So, your child being able to do something in the morning and then not in the afternoon, or not being able to do something today that they did yesterday, it's not evidence that they're not trying. It's a hallmark of their neurodivergence. Like, we should expect this. So, like, like slow clap. We're showing up as neurodivergent, and we are. It's like, okay. But again, like we said, sorry, that probably felt demeaning. I wasn't trying to be. I'm just saying that this is just more evidence of this human's brain wiring. So no shade to teachers here, but I think, this is just that they can do things, in the morning versus afternoon. It's just like it's the wiring. And so,
Well,
uh,
and to Brianne, I have that same thing with myself where I'm like,
right.
God, you just need to really, this season is going to be the season I learn discipline. Like, can't tell you how many times I've said that, right?
Yeah.
Because I forget the own dynamic nature of my own lived experience,
Right.
let
Like,
alone my kids or let alone children in a classroom when I was a teacher, you know.
yeah. So I think, yeah, this is the season. I will not start a new doom bag and just put all that mail right in that canvas bag. Anyway, if this happens and you can explain to the teacher your child's disability is dynamic. So, then ask more about when your child is able to do the thing that is the concern when they're not. So, again, let's get curious and see if there are other ways that we can support the kiddo. Again, we're just trying to get a baseline of understanding. And I feel like this episode is my life right now. And I feel like it's so helpful to be doing this episode right now because we're in October. This is when like things are settling in, you're getting to know. My husband just came home recently and was like, honeymoon's over. I really know my students now. And so just know if you're in it right now, it's okay. And we hope that these tips are helpful so that you can work collaboratively with teachers because we love you, teachers.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this recording is an example of a dynamic disability because we don't usually record on Friday afternoons, and
Yeah,
we are both in like a different like
we are different
different
and
form.
my kids are already on fall break and I've already had a day and a half. So, mhm. Just that context is important if you've been around here for a while. And if you're new, then I'm sorry.
Let's watch a different episode. We're not always like this.
Oh my gosh. Anyway,
Anyways, so scenario number 3. A lot of times teachers are taught to, when they are giving feedback to family members, to do this like sandwich thing. So they'll tell you something positive about your kid, slide in this thing that needs to be worked on, and then, come back and say something else positive. We call it the feedback sandwich often.
mm, mm,
And the intention there is to not overly focus on areas that need growth, right? We don't want to come to we don't want a parent to feel like you come into a conference, it's like, let me tell you all the things your kid isn't doing yet and how they're so far behind and yada yada. That's the intention of doing the feedback sandwich, is to avoid parents feeling like all they're hearing are these opportunities for growth or these negative things. So sometimes the impact of that is the feedback gets a little bit murky and we're not exactly sure, how big of a deal it is. Sometimes we don't even like fully process it the first time. So one of the things that I would say, if that's happening, I kind of visualize that as like somebody scrolling really quickly through something. You can pause the conversation as the parent and you can say, like, thank you so much for this. Can we pause for a second? I'd like to hear a little bit more about, blah, 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 whatever they said. And then I think the other part that becomes murky here is just like how concerned they really are. And so you can ask clarifying questions like, I heard you say my kid's behavior is disruptive, but now it's improved. How concerned are you about the disruptions now? Or I hear that you say that my kiddo's behind academically, but they're doing better on the last assignment. Can you give me a comparison? Like, how far behind
right.
is he in this thing, right? Like, go ahead and pause the conversation to get the clarity that you're looking for.
Right. Yeah. Every kid is unique, and the goal is not to compare them to others, but it also can be helpful sometimes just to get a sense of what the teacher is communicating. You could ask, how is my child performing on, reading compared, or, whatever it is that you're concerned about compared to most of the students this year in class, or according to, their growth since last year, because sometimes they're making growth. They might still be, not where they ideally this arbitrary milestone that's set by these assessments, but it's good to get some more info so you can like discern, should I be doing more at home, should we be doing this? Yeah, give it some context, please.
Yes. And I actually don't think comparison in and of itself is bad. I think sometimes comparison actually gives us clarity, and we can compare our kids to same age peers to kind of get a temperature check, a measurement of your child compared to the other kids, which would be kind of an achievement in academic speak. We'd call that an achievement measure. So maybe they are green or on grade level, or maybe they're a year behind. And if somebody's giving you numbers like that, that can be really helpful because it can give you kind of like a stamp on where they are compared to where neurotypical kids might be. And that's actually an important measure. The other one that's also important is a growth measure, like Brianne's
Yeah,
talking about
comparing your kid to your kid.
here. Yeah. So it's like, okay, well, they continue to make growth. I think where we get into trouble and where people get anxious about, especially the achievement measure, is that we overemphasize it and we're like, oh my gosh, you're behind. Like, depending upon what their disability is, that wouldn't be a disability if they weren't behind, right? So it's just information and then we can do what we want with that information. I think it's when we get really anxious about it that's where it's not necessarily as helpful, right? But
Yes,
knowing the information can be quite valuable.
agreed.
Okay, so let's talk really quickly about what happens if you walk away from conferences and you're getting the sense that your kid needs something more support, more accommodations, more services, or you're like, I don't actually know what they need, but it seems like they need something more. A lot of times people will say things like, oh, like, let's just like keep checking in and, we can loop back on this in the spring or in the new year. Let's give them some more time. If you are feeling like, I need more information, or I heard that last year, this is a very good time of year to actually start working on the more, whatever that is. People are often surprised by how long it takes to work through. If you're trying to get an evaluation, for example, like how long it takes to work from the referral process to the assessment, like all of that really honestly takes months and months. And if you start in October, you'll probably get through the process sometime in like late winter or like mid to late winter, or maybe even later with all the holidays in there. That's if you're going through the school sector. If you're going through the private sector, there's often wait lists and things like that that can just prolong the process even more. So, long story short, if you're feeling like I need more information or my child needs more, this might be a very good time to get started on that. I think a lot of times people think it's like, oh, we'll know more information in a month and be able to move on. And that's actually not the case. It's a quite long and involved process. So if you're in that spot, really consider getting started now.
Yeah, you're right. It is a long road. And if that's something you're thinking about, check out Morgan's course. We'll put a link in the show notes. It explains all about the options for assessment, the cost, the timeline, your legal rights, and gives you form letters, websites, checklists, everything you need to make a complicated process easier. I have actually been supported by some of the form letters myself. I always love a template. Starting from scratch overwhelms my brain. So if that's you, definitely check it out.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week to talk about masking.
If we are a good fit for you, follow us on Instagram. Dr. Morgan is at Dr. Morgan Beitelman, and Brienne is at It's Brienne Colpitts. You can find the podcast on YouTube and Patreon at Parenting Neurodivergent Humans.
And as always, if you have a question or topic you want us to cover, send us a note. You can message us on Instagram or use the Google form in the show notes.
And as always, thank you to our editor and producer, Erica Carpenter. We appreciate you.
Thanks for joining us. See you next week.
I feel like my voice sounds like this. Just a quick disclosure, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute a psychologist-client relationship and should not be used in place of an expert evaluation or therapy. I'm like, so this is afternoon Morgan. Okay.